The monitoring station floated alone in the darkness between stars. It was a small place, cold and quiet, where only 12 people lived and worked. Their job was simple. They listened to the universe. They searched for signals in the endless black. For 200 years, humanity had been listening. For 200 years, they had heard nothing but silence. Lieutenant was tired. He had been on duty for 11 hours, watching screens filled with static and meaningless noise. His coffee had gone cold 3 hours ago. His eyes hurt from staring at data streams that never changed. He was thinking about his bed when the signal came. At first he thought it was a mistake. The computer made errors sometimes. Space was full of strange sounds, pulsars, radiation storms, the echoes of dying stars, but this was different. This had a pattern. This had meaning. Sat up straight in his chair. His heart began to beat faster. He ran the signal through the translation software, but the computer could not understand it. The language was completely unknown. It was not human. It was not any language humanity had ever heard. He called for Park. Was the station's linguist. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a brilliant mind. She had spent her whole life studying languages, and she had always dreamed of hearing one from another world. When showed her the signal, her hands began to shake. It took her 6 days to crack the basics. She worked without sleep, eating only when others forced food into her hands. The language was strange and beautiful, built on sounds that human throats could barely make. But slowly, word by word, she began to understand. On the 7th day, she gathered the station crew together. "It is a message," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "A plea for help. They call themselves they are a peaceful people, scholars, healers. They have no army, they have no weapons, and they are dying." She played the translated message. The voice that spoke was soft and gentle, filled with a sadness that needed no translation to understand. "We send this message into the void without hope," the voice said. "Our worlds are burning, our children are dying, we have done nothing wrong, we have only tried to live in peace. But they came anyway. They take everything, they destroy everything. We cannot fight, we do not know how. If anyone hears this, please, we are begging, help us." The room was silent for a long time. Transmitted the message to Earth. It traveled at the speed of light across the 12 human star systems, reaching every government, every military command, every news network. Within hours, the entire human race knew. They were not alone, and somewhere in the galaxy, innocent people were being murdered. The United Council of Earth met in emergency session. The Great Hall was filled with the leaders of humanity, presidents, prime ministers, generals, scientists. They argued for 3 days. Admiral stood before them on the final day. He was an old soldier, haired and stern-faced, with scars from battles fought long ago. He had commanded fleets. He had won wars, and he had never forgotten what it meant to protect those who could not protect themselves. "I have heard the arguments against intervention," he said. "I understand them. We know nothing about this enemy. We do not know how strong they are. We do not know if we can win. Going to war could mean the deaths of millions of our own people." He paused. The hall was completely silent. "But I ask you to listen to that message again. Listen to the voice of someone watching their children die. Listen to someone who has no hope left, and then tell me we should do nothing." Han rose to speak. She was a careful woman known for her wisdom and caution. "Admiral, I respect your passion, but we must think clearly. They have conquered this galaxy for 10,000 years. 10,000 years without defeat. Every species that has fought them has been destroyed. What makes us different?" "Nothing," Admiral said. "We are not special. We are not chosen. We are just people. But we are people who heard someone crying for help. And I believe that when you hear that cry, you must answer. That is what makes us human." The vote was close, 47 in favor, 43 against. Humanity would go to war. The fleet assembled at the edge of the solar system. 73 warships, the largest force humanity had ever gathered. battleships with guns that could crack planets, carriers filled with fighter craft, destroyers fast enough to chase light, and at the center of them all, the flagship Indomitable with Admiral on the bridge. Park was there too. She had demanded to come. "Someone needs to talk to them," she said. "Someone needs to learn who they are before we ask them to trust us." Captain Lee commanded the destroyer. She was young for a captain, only 32 years old, but she had proven herself in the border conflicts near Neptune. Her crew loved her because she never asked them to do anything she would not do herself. On the night before the jump, walked through her ship and spoke to every member of her crew. She found them in the mess hall, in the engine rooms, in the weapons bays. Some were scared, some were excited, some were praying. "I will not lie to you," she told them. "I do not know what we will find out there. I do not know if we will survive, but I know why we are going. We are going because someone asked for help, and that is enough." In his quarters on the Indomitable, Admiral wrote a letter to his son. Was 25 years old, a junior officer on the cruiser Horizon. He would be part of the fleet. Father and son would go to war together. "I am proud of you," the Admiral wrote. "Not because you are brave, though you are. Not because you are strong, though you are. I am proud because you chose to come. You could have stayed safe. You could have let others fight. But you understood that safety bought with silence is no safety at all. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that. Remember why we fight." The fleet jumped at midnight. The journey took 3 weeks. Hyperspace was strange and silent, a place between places where time moved differently. The crews trained. They prepared. They waited. And then finally they arrived. Prime filled It was a beautiful world, blue and green like Earth, but there was smoke rising from the cities. There were burning ships in orbit. There were bodies floating in the void. Watching from a communication station on the Indomitable felt his stomach turn. He had heard the message. He had known it was bad, but seeing it was different. Seeing made it real. Admiral's voice came over the fleet channel, calm and steady. "All ships, this is the Admiral. What you see before you is why we came. Those are innocent people down there, people who asked the universe for help. Today, the universe answers. Today, we answer. All hands to battle stations. We are going to war." The signal had been heard. The cry for mercy had crossed the empty darkness between stars and found the one species foolish enough, brave enough, human enough to answer. And now the answer had arrived. There was dying. Admiral could see it clearly from the bridge of the Indomitable. Great cities lay in ruins below, their towers broken and burning. Refugee ships drifted without power, their lights dark, their engines cold. Orbital stations that had once been centers of learning and healing were now shattered husks, spinning slowly through fields of debris. 3 of the 5 worlds had already fallen. This was the 4th. If the humans had arrived 1 week later, there would have been nothing left to save. "Scan for survivors," the Admiral ordered. "All ships, begin rescue operations. Get those refugee vessels under tow. I want medical teams ready to receive wounded." Captain Lee brought the in close to the largest cluster of drifting ships. Her crew worked fast, extending docking tubes and pulling the helpless vessels to safety. When they opened the first airlock, they found them. They were beautiful in a strange and fragile way. They were tall and thin, with skin like pale silver and eyes that held a deep and gentle light. Their hands had 6 fingers, long and delicate. Their voices were soft, almost like music. They wore simple clothes in shades of white and blue, and they carried no weapons of any kind. They were also terrified. When the human soldiers entered the ship in their combat armor, carrying rifles and wearing helmets that hid their faces, they pulled back in fear. Children hid behind their parents. The elderly closed their eyes and waited for death. Understood immediately. She ordered her soldiers to lower their weapons. Then she removed her own helmet and stepped forward alone. "We are not here to hurt you," she said. The translator on her belt converted her words into the language. "We heard your message. We came to help." An old woman moved slowly through the crowd. She was bent with age, her silver skin faded too, but her eyes were sharp and clear. She wore a simple robe marked with symbols that did not understand. This was elder, leader of what remained of the people. Looked at for a long time. She looked at the weapons the soldiers carried. She looked at the warship visible through the airlock window. "You came," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "We sent our message into the void expecting nothing. We had no hope. Why would you come? You do not know us. We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay you. We cannot help you. We are weak and broken. Why would anyone come?" Thought about this question. She thought about the long journey through hyperspace. She thought about the 73 ships and the thousands of soldiers who had crossed the galaxy for strangers they had never met. "You asked for help," she said simply. "That was enough." Began to cry. The tears that fell from her silver eyes were clear like water, and they caught the light like diamonds. She reached out with her six-fingered hand and touched face, gently, as if making sure she was real. "In all our history," said, "in all the stories of all the worlds we have known, no one has ever come. When they arrive, people run, people hide, people die. No one fights, no one helps. We are the seventh species they have taken in my lifetime. We thought we would be forgotten like all the others." Park arrived on a shuttle an hour later. She spent 3 days with and the elders, learning their language properly, understanding their culture. What she discovered broke her heart. They had existed for over 50,000 years. They had built great universities where scholars studied the mysteries of the universe. They had developed medicines that could cure almost any disease. Their artists had created works of beauty that took centuries to complete. They had spread across 5 worlds, living in peace, never harming anyone. They had never built a weapon. The concept of war was almost impossible for them to understand. Violence existed in their history only as a subject of academic study, a strange behavior observed in primitive species long ago. When they came, they had tried to reason with them. They had offered knowledge. They had offered healing. They had offered friendship. They had laughed and begun the killing. "We do not understand," told. "We gave them everything they asked for. We surrendered. We submitted. Why do they keep killing us?" Did not know how to answer. She had studied many languages and many cultures. She understood that different species thought in different ways, but she also understood evil when she saw it. They did not kill because they had to. They killed because they enjoyed it. The patrol fleet arrived on the 4th day. They came out of hyperspace without warning, 20 massive warships appearing suddenly in the darkness beyond the planet. They were monsters of metal and fire, kilometer-long dreadnoughts covered with weapons. Their hulls were painted with symbols of conquest, and they moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. The lead ship broadcast a message. The voice that spoke was harsh and cruel, filled with contempt. "Unknown vessels, this is Overlord of the Dominion. You are interfering with a sanctioned cleansing operation. This system belongs to us. These creatures belong to us. You will withdraw immediately or be destroyed. You have 1 hour to comply." Admiral listened to the message on the bridge of the Indomitable. Around him, his officers waited in tense silence. The ships were massive, far larger than anything in the human fleet. Their weapons were powerful. Their reputation was fearsome. But had seen the refugee ships. He had heard the reports from the rescue teams. He had read the numbers. 14 million dead on this world alone. Children burned alive in their schools. Hospitals destroyed while doctors tried to save their patients. Entire cities erased from existence because the found it amusing. He opened a channel to the entire fleet. "All ships, this is the Admiral. You have seen what we are fighting for. You have seen what happens when no one stands against these monsters. I will not order you to die for strangers, but I will tell you this. If we leave now, every on this world will be dead by morning. Every child, every elder, every healer who wanted only to help others. They will die alone, knowing that we abandoned them." He paused. The channel was silent. Not a single voice spoke in opposition. "All hands to battle stations. All weapons hot. We are not going anywhere." They responded exactly 1 hour later. Their plasma lances fired first, great beams of blue-white energy that could cut through steel like paper. The human ship Morning Star took the first hit and exploded in a ball of fire, killing everyone aboard instantly. Admiral did not hesitate. "All ships engage. Show them what humanity is made of." The Battle of Prime lasted 11 hours. Captain led into the heart of the formation, her ship dancing between enemy fire with impossible grace. Her gunners found weak points in the massive dreadnoughts, places where the armor was thin, where the reactors were vulnerable. 3 ships fell to her guns alone. The carrier launched wave after wave of fighters, small craft piloted by men and women who knew they might not return. They swarmed the vessels like angry insects, distracting, harassing, dying so that the larger ships could land killing blows. The battleship rammed a dreadnought when her guns ran dry, her captain ordering all hands to evacuate before driving his burning ship into the enemy's bridge at full speed. When it was over, 19 human ships had been destroyed. 4,000 soldiers had died, but the fleet was gone. Every single enemy vessel was burning wreckage, drifting through the void. On the surface of Prime, the survivors emerged from their shelters and looked up at the sky. The fires were going out. The killing had stopped. Strange new ships orbited overhead, ships that had come from the other side of the galaxy to protect them. Elder stood in the ruins of her city and watched the human shuttles descend, bringing medicine and food and hope. She did not understand these creatures. She did not understand why they had come. She did not understand how they could be so willing to die for strangers. But she understood one thing clearly. The galaxy would never be the same. The victory at Prime was only the beginning. Admiral stood in the war room of the Indomitable, staring at a holographic map of the galaxy. The Dominion was vast beyond imagination. Over 200 star systems, thousands of warships, billions of soldiers. They had been conquering the galaxy for 10,000 years, and no one had ever stopped them. Humanity had won a single battle. The war would require much more. "We cannot do this alone," the Admiral said to his officers. "Our fleet is strong, but it is small. The will come back with 100 times the force we face today. We need allies." Intelligence Officer Bay stepped forward. He was a quiet man with a sharp mind, someone who collected information the way others collected coins. He had been studying the galaxy's history ever since the first message from the arrived. "There are others," he said. "Many others, species that the conquered or drove into hiding. Most of them are gone forever, but some survived. They hid in places that would not look. Asteroid fields, gas giant atmospheres, dead moons. They have been hiding for thousands of years, waiting for something they never believed would come." "What were they waiting for?" Captain asked. Hope said. "They were waiting for someone to prove that they could be beaten." The search began immediately. Led a small team on the scout ship Pathfinder, jumping from system to system, following ancient records and faint signals. What they found amazed them. They lived in the asteroid belt of a dying star. They were creatures, their bodies covered in hard shells of blue and green. Long ago, they had been the greatest engineers in the galaxy. Their space stations were marvels of design. Their ships were works of art. Then they came and burned their worlds, and the survivors fled into the rocks, building hidden colonies where they waited in darkness. Their leader was called. He was old, his shell cracked and faded, but his mind was still sharp. When told him about the Battle of Prime, made a strange sound that might have been laughter. "We have watched others fight," said. The 12 nations of all of them brave, all of them strong, all of them dead. What makes you different, human? What makes you think you can succeed where everyone else has failed?" Thought carefully before answering. He remembered the speech Admiral had given before the fleet jumped. He remembered Captain removing her helmet to show her human face. He remembered the soldiers who had died to protect strangers. "We do not know how to surrender," he said. "It is not in our nature. We fight until we win or until we die. There is no middle ground." Studied him for a long time, then he nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you are the ones we have been waiting for." They were the first to join, but they were not the last. They lived in the deep oceans of a water world, their bodies adapted to crushing pressure and eternal darkness. They were strange and beautiful, with bioluminescent patterns that rippled across their skin like living art. Their minds worked in ways that humans could barely understand. They could calculate hyperspace routes faster than any computer, seeing the mathematics of the universe as easily as humans saw colors. They lived on a world of fire and stone, their bodies made of living crystal that could survive temperatures that would melt steel. They were giants, slow and patient, with memories that stretched back millions of years. Once, they had forged the strongest ship hulls in the galaxy. Now they spent their days hiding in caves, remembering the glory they had lost. They were the strangest of all. They were empaths, their minds connected to each other across vast distances. On one side of the galaxy could feel the emotions of on the other. They had once used this gift to coordinate great works of peace and art. Now they used it to hide, warning each other whenever they came near. Park became the voice of humanity among these forgotten peoples. She learned 17 alien languages in 2 years, spending long nights studying grammar and vocabulary until she could speak as naturally as a native. But more than words, she learned their stories. Every species had tales of the time before they sang songs about their great stations, cities of metal and light that floated among the stars. They painted pictures of the worlds they had once explored, using colors that human eyes could barely see. They carved statues of their ancestors, crystal figures that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. And every species had tales of resistance, heroes who had stood against the fallen, fleets that had fought and died, worlds that had burned rather than surrender. "You were brave once," told them. "You can be brave again." The Coalition of the Forgotten was born in a meeting on the moon of Prime. Representatives from 6 species gathered in a room that smelled of a dozen different atmospheres. Translators worked overtime to convert words and concepts between languages that had never touched before. Admiral spoke first. "I will not promise you victory," he said. "They are strong. Many of us will die. Perhaps all of us will die, but I can promise you this. We will not stop fighting. We will not surrender. We will not run away and hide while innocent people suffer. If that is the kind of war you want to fight, then stand with us." Elder of the spoke next. "My people cannot fight. We do not have the strength or the skill, but we can heal. We can care for the wounded. We can give hope to the hopeless. This is our contribution." Of the rose on his legs. "We can build, we can repair. We can create weapons and ships and stations. This is what we were made for. It is time we remembered." One by one the representatives spoke. They would navigate, they would forge, they would coordinate. Each species had something to offer. Each species had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. When the meeting ended, they had the beginning of an army. Over the next 3 years, the coalition grew. More hidden species emerged from their hiding places. Ancient factories came back to life. Ships that had been buried were dug out of asteroid fields and repaired. Warriors who had given up all hope began to train again. Worked tirelessly, traveling from system to system, convincing the scared and the broken that they could fight back. He found communities of survivors in the strangest places, a group of living in a hollowed-out comet, a tribe of who had disguised their world as a dead rock, a colony of hiding in the ice of a frozen moon. Not everyone agreed to join. Some were too afraid. Some had given up entirely. Some looked at the humans and saw only another species that would eventually fall. But enough said yes. Enough remembered what it felt like to stand up straight instead of cowering in the dark. Enough wanted to fight. Captain trained the first mixed species unit, soldiers from 5 different worlds learning to fight together. It was not easy. They were fast but fragile. They were strong but slow. The humans were somewhere in between, but slowly they learned to work as one. "We are not the same," told them. "We will never be the same, but we do not need to be the same. We need to be together. That is enough." On the anniversary of the Battle of Prime, the Coalition fleet assembled for the first time. 400 ships from a dozen species, flying in formation around the world they had saved. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and looked at the fleet on his. Human ships flew beside cruisers. Navigators guided forgers. Coordinators linked the minds of commanders across the formation. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy had an army. They would learn what that meant. The war lasted 12 years. 12 years of battles, 12 years of death, 12 years of sacrifice so great that no one could measure it. The galaxy burned from one end to the other, and in the flames, heroes were born. Commander led the assault on the shipyards It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. The shipyards were the heart of the war machine, the place where they built their massive dreadnoughts. If the Coalition could destroy them, the enemy would not be able to replace their losses. They knew this too. They had stationed 200 warships to guard the yards. The Coalition could only spare 60. Did not care about the odds. He had seen what they did to the worlds they conquered. He had walked through the ruins of Prime. He had held dying children in his arms and promised them that their deaths would mean something. "All ships follow me," he broadcast to his fleet. "We are going straight down their throats. Some of us will die. Maybe all of us will die, but those shipyards will burn. I swear it on my life." The battle lasted 6 hours. The Coalition lost 38 ships. His own vessel was hit 17 times, each impact killing more of his crew. When the engines failed, he ordered everyone to abandon ship, everyone except himself. "Go," he told his officers. "I will finish this." He aimed his crippled ship at the central reactor of the largest shipyard. His last transmission was broadcast across the Coalition fleet. "Tell my daughter I kept my promise." The explosion destroyed 3 shipyards and 12 vessels. The war would continue for 8 more years, but the enemy would never again build ships as fast as they lost them. Sergeant O was not supposed to be a hero. She was a quiet woman who had joined the military to pay for her education. She had never expected to fight a galactic war. She had never expected to hold the line at station while 20,000 civilians waited for evacuation. They came with overwhelming force. 500 soldiers, armored and hungry for blood, had 400 Marines and a defensive position that was never meant to hold against a real assault. "We hold," she told her soldiers. "We hold until the last transport leaves. Not one civilian dies on our watch." They held for 3 days. On the first day, they broke through the outer perimeter, led the counterattack herself, pushing them back with grenades and rifle fire. She killed 14 enemies with her own hands. On the second day, the ammunition began to run out. Organized teams to collect weapons from the dead, both Coalition and, when a soldier complained about using enemy rifles, she silenced him with a look. "A gun is a gun. Use it." On the third day, they brought up heavy artillery. The walls of the station began to crumble. Lost her left arm to a piece of shrapnel that tore through the command post. She wrapped the wound herself and kept fighting. When the last transport lifted off with the final group of refugees, was still standing at the barricade. She had 17 Marines left alive out of 400. They had stopped attacking. They were waiting, she knew, to bring up more troops for a final assault. The rescue shuttle landed behind her lines 5 minutes later, was carried aboard by her soldiers, unconscious from blood loss but still breathing. She woke up 3 days later in a hospital ship, looked at the empty space where her arm used to be, and asked when she could return to duty. The doctors gave her a prosthetic arm made of alloys and crystal. It was stronger than her original arm had been. Was back in combat within 6 months, leading the same unit that had held station. They adapted. They were not stupid. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years because they knew how to fight and how to change. They began using biological weapons, plagues designed to kill specific species, a virus that shells, a bacterium that turned crystal brittle, a toxin that drove empaths insane with the psychic screams of the dying. Doctor was a medical researcher who had never intended to join the war. She was studying cellular regeneration on a quiet research station when the first plague ships arrived in Coalition space. Within a week, she had lost 3 colleagues. Within a month, she had lost her entire family. Grief would have broken a lesser person, turned hers into fuel. She worked with healers, combining human science with alien knowledge that was older than human civilization. She studied the plagues, dissected them, understood them. For 3 years, she slept only 4 hours a night. She forgot what sunlight looked like. She forgot the taste of food that was not eaten while staring at a microscope. But she found answers, vaccines, treatments, cures. The plagues that were meant to shatter the Coalition became minor inconveniences. Billions of lives were saved by her work. When they gave her a medal, she refused it. "I do not want recognition," she said. "I want them to know that everything they throw at us we will defeat. Their weapons, their plagues, their cruelty, all of it, we will defeat all of it." Admiral aged 20 years and 10. His hair turned white. His hands began to shake. He stopped sleeping through the night, waking every few hours from dreams of burning ships and dying soldiers. He lost count of the memorial services he attended. He lost count of the letters he wrote to families, telling them that their children had died bravely. He lost count of the faces of young officers who had served under him and would never grow old. But he never stopped, he never wavered, he never considered surrender. His son served on the cruiser Horizon. He was a good officer, skilled and brave, but he was not famous. He was just one more soldier in an army of millions. He died at the Battle of Forward when his ship was destroyed covering the retreat of a damaged carrier. Admiral received the news alone in his quarters. He sat in the dark for one night, staring at a photograph of his son as a child. He allowed himself to cry. He allowed himself to feel the weight of everything he had lost. Then he stood up, put on his uniform, and returned to the bridge. "What are our losses?" he asked his officers. They told him. It was a long list. His son's name was one among thousands. "Then we keep fighting," the admiral said. "We owe it to them, all of them." The turning point came at the siege of the capital system. The Coalition had grown to over 4,000 ships, a fleet larger than anything the galaxy had seen in 10,000 years. Humans fought beside, navigated for, linked the minds of commanders from a dozen different species. They had 6,000 ships waiting for them. It was the largest battle in galactic history. The fighting lasted for 11 days. The darkness between planets was filled with fire and light and death. Ships crashed into each other. Soldiers fought hand to hand in the corridors of braking vessels. The very fabric of space seemed to shake under the violence. Captain Lee, now commanding the carrier reunification, led the breakthrough assault. Her pilots, human and alien alike, found gaps in the defense grid and tore them wider. Ground forces landed on for the first time ever, planting the Coalition flag on the capital world of the enemy. The Supreme Overlord, a creature called who had ruled for 300 years, watched the battle from his throne room. He saw his fleets burning. He saw his soldiers dying. He saw his world invaded by species he had once considered prey. For the first time in his long life, he felt fear. He requested a ceasefire. The war was not over, the killing was not finished, but the end was finally in sight. The treaty of was signed on a morning in the ruins of the capital. Rain fell from clouds that had been seeded by orbital bombardment, washing away the ash and blood of the battle that had ended 10,000 years of empire. Admiral stood across the table from Overlord. The leader was massive, his body covered in scales of dark red, his eyes yellow and cold. He had conquered 100 worlds. He had ordered the deaths of billions. Now he sat in chains, signing a document that dissolved everything his species had built. The terms were harsh. The Dominion was finished. All conquered territories would be freed. All surviving slave populations would be returned to there. All war criminals would face trial before a galactic court. The military would be reduced to a defensive force, never again allowed to leave their home system without permission. Signed the document with a hand that shook with rage. When it was done, he looked at Admiral with pure hatred in his eyes. "You think you have won," said. "You think this is victory, but you have only delayed the inevitable. My species ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. We will rule it again. One day your great will kneel before mine." Admiral did not flinch. He had heard threats before. He had heard promises of vengeance and warnings of doom. They meant nothing to him anymore. "Perhaps," he said calmly, "but today you kneel before me, and that is enough." The celebrations across the galaxy lasted for months. On 1,000 worlds, survivors emerged from hiding and danced in streets that had been silent for generations. They rebuilt their great stations, lights blooming in the darkness between stars. They returned to the oceans they had abandoned, swimming free for the first time in. They came out of their caves and began to forge again, their hammers ringing with the sound of hope. But victory was complicated. Park sat with Elder on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt cities of Prime. The towers that had burned were rising again, white and beautiful against the blue sky. Children played in parks that had once been graveyards. Healers worked in hospitals that had been rebuilt with human and technology. Was very old now. The war had aged her even more than it had aged the humans. Her silver skin was nearly white, her hands trembled, and her eyes often looked at things that were not there. But her mind was still sharp, and her questions were still difficult. "Your people saved us," said quietly. "We owe you our lives, we owe you our future. This debt can never be repaid." Shook her head. "There is no debt, we did what was right, that is all." "Perhaps," was silent for a moment watching the children play below. "But I wonder what it has cost you. Your people were not warriors when you came to us. I remember the first humans we met. They were strange and loud and full of energy, but they were not killers. Now your children grow up learning to fight. Your heroes are soldiers. Your stories are about battles and blood. What have you become?" Thought about this for a long time. She thought about Commander ramming his ship into the shipyards. She thought about Sergeant holding the line for 3 days with one arm. She thought about Doctor sacrificing her health to save billions of lives. She thought about Admiral burying his son and returning to the bridge. "We were always warriors," she finally said. "We just forgot for a while. The galaxy reminded us." Turned to look at her directly. "And now that you remember, what will you do with this strength?" "Protect those who cannot protect themselves," said. "That is what we have always done. That is what we will always do." The coalition did not dissolve after the war. There was talk of it, especially among the humans who wanted to return home and forget about the galaxy. But too much had changed. Too many connections had been made. Too many species had learned to depend on each other. Instead, the coalition transformed. It became the Galactic Compact, a mutual defense alliance where every species contributed what it could. There would never again be a 10,000-year empire of conquest. There would never again be a species hunted to extinction while the rest of the galaxy looked away. If anyone cried for help, someone would answer. They provided their medicine and their wisdom. They provided their engineering. They provided their navigation. They provided their forging. They provided their coordination. And the humans provided something harder to define. They provided will. They provided stubbornness. They provided the refusal to give up, even when the odds were impossible. They provided the fury that came from seeing innocent people suffer. Admiral, now elderly and retired, gave the keynote address at the first Compact Summit. Representatives from 37 species filled the great hall, creatures of every shape and size, all of them looking at the old human with respect and gratitude. He walked slowly to the podium. His hair was completely white now. His hands shook with age. His voice was softer than it had been when he commanded fleets, but his words were still strong. "We did not come to your stars because we wanted war," he said. "We came because you asked for help and we could not look away. That is what it means to be human. We hear suffering and we answer. Sometimes the only answer is fire." He paused, looking out at the faces before him. So many different species, so many different stories, all of them brought together by a single message sent into the void by a dying people. "I lost my son in this war," he continued. "Many of you lost children, parents, friends, entire worlds. The cost of freedom is measured in graves. It is measured in empty chairs at dinner tables and photographs of faces we will never see again. But we paid that cost because the alternative was worse. Slavery is worse. Genocide is worse. Watching innocent people die while we do nothing is worse." He straightened slightly, and for a moment he looked like the young admiral who had led the first fleet to Prime. The galaxy called for mercy. Humanity answered with war. "We are not sorry. We are not ashamed. We would do it again. And if anyone threatens this peace, if anyone tries to build another empire of conquest and death, we will do it again. That is our promise. That is our gift. That is our curse." The hall erupted in applause that lasted for 10 minutes. Later that night, Bay found Captain Lee standing alone on a balcony, looking up at the stars. She was older now, her hair streaked with, her face lined with the marks of battles fought and friends lost. But she still stood straight, and her eyes were still sharp. "What are you thinking about?" asked. "The signal," said. "The first message, the one that started everything. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if had been asleep, if had not been able to translate it, if we had never heard the crying for help." "We would have missed all of this," said. "The war, the death, the suffering." "Yes," nodded slowly, "but we also would have missed the courage, the sacrifice, the moment when a dozen species put aside their differences and stood together against evil. We would have missed becoming what we became." "What did we become?" Smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was genuine. "We became the ones who answer." On Prime, a young child tugged at her mother's sleeve. They were standing in a museum, looking at a display about the war. The centerpiece was a human battle flag, torn and burned but still recognizable, recovered from the wreck of a ship that had died protecting a refugee convoy. "Mother," the child asked, "were the humans always so fierce?" Her mother, who remembered the burning skis and the human ships that had darkened them with protective fire, smiled softly. She remembered the day the strangers had come from across the galaxy to save her people. She remembered the fear and the wonder and the desperate hope. "No, little one," she said. "They became fierce for us. That is why we remember them. That is why we always will." Outside the museum, the sun was setting over the rebuilt city. Children played in the streets. Healers walked between the hospitals and the gardens. Ships from a dozen worlds crossed the sky, carrying trade and knowledge and friendship. The galaxy had called for mercy. Humanity had answered with war. And when the war was over, they had taught the galaxy something it had forgotten. They had taught it how to stand,